Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
"You're saying that there's no trick-or-treating allowed here tonight?" Dennis asked. He stood in the middle of the murky second-floor bedroom. Kara walked over to a set of windows and pulled the curtains back. Dust motes danced in the golden afternoon light all around her. "It's against the law?" Dennis asked. "I didn't say that," Kara answered without turning around to look at him. She stared out the windows that looked down onto the street. "It's hard to explain. It's just something they don't do here." Kara had said the word "they" like she wasn't one of them, even though she lived in this village as a child. Dennis had agreed to come up here to this tiny town tucked away in a forgotten corner of Maine after Kara told him that her grandmother had passed away. She'd said her grandmother was wealthy and had left her some stuff in a will. But, so far, Dennis wasn't very impressed. He guessed the woman had been wealthy in the context of this little town. Dennis had noticed as soon as they'd entered the town earlier in the day that there were no Halloween decorations anywhere, even though it was Halloween. Well, there were decorations, but strange ones. Pumpkins with no faces carved into them. Stalks of dried corn and bales of hay stacked up near the pumpkins. Little straw men and stick figures crafted from twigs and twine hanging on front doors and windows. They had driven into town on a remote county road that intersected with the other main road, the town square. In the center of the square was a large field, and in the middle of that field, a 15-foot-tall stick figure had been constructed with more stalks of dried corn and bales of hay bunched up at the figure's feet. There was a school/church at the far end of the town square, and a few businesses lined both sides of the square, including a city hall, a post office, and a volunteer fire department. The homes around the square and the ones on the side of the streets looked old, maybe at least 100 years old, but everything looked meticulously taken care of. On the outskirts of the village were some farms, some large, some small, and then there was nothing but woods as far as the eye could see. The village was quaint, even beautiful in its own timeless way. The few people he'd met earlier in the day seemed friendly, but there was something conspiratorial about them. He felt watched, like he was an outsider to be wary of. He didn't know how to describe it, but they all seemed nervous and tense, like they were scared of something. Kara's grandmother's home was only 2 blocks away from the center of town on the corner of the main road and a side street. It was a 3-story Victorian-style home. "What about the kids?" Dennis asked as he watched Kara at the windows of her grandmother's bedroom. "Halloween should be for kids." "We just don't do it here," she practically snapped at him. Dennis didn't say anything for a moment. Kara was tense. She was obviously upset about her grandmother, and he thought he should leave her alone. She had missed her grandmother's funeral a week ago, and now she was here to take care of a few legal matters and pick through some things at her grandmother's house. He thought about walking over to her and touching her, holding her, comforting her in some way, but he didn't. She turned around and looked at him. "I'm sorry, I'm just—" "Hey," he said, and now he was across the room in a flash. "It's okay, I understand." Kara had already lost her mother a few years ago, but she'd never gone into too much detail about her death. Her dad had run off when Kara had been a baby, and she'd never heard from him again. She didn't have any brothers and sisters. Her grandmother was all she had left in the world. And Dennis knew how she felt. He wasn't close to his family, most of them gone now too. It was one of the things that had drawn them to each other. He wanted to change the subject, start over somehow. Instead, he hugged her, a gentle squeeze. I'm gonna grab a beer," he said, thinking he should give her some time alone up here. He had a cooler full of beers downstairs. Kara had told him to bring his own beer because they didn't sell alcohol in town. She nodded and turned back to the windows, staring down at the street. Dennis left her alone. They ate a dinner of sandwiches they had brought with them in the cooler, and Dennis was finishing up his fourth beer. The sun was setting, the shadows of the spooky old house growing long, taking over. Kara had turned on the kitchen light and lit some candles in the living room, but they struggled to push back the oncoming darkness. Kara got up and walked to a coat closet in the living room across from the front door. She pulled out one of those stick figure things that Dennis had seen hanging on the other people's doors and windows all over town. "That looks like something from the Blair Witch Project," Dennis joked as he watched her. "Grandma would have wanted it on her front door tonight." "What are those stick figures supposed to mean?" he asked. She shrugged as she opened the front door and hung the figure on a hook over the pane of glass. She closed the door and locked it. "Oh, it's just a tradition. Something we've always done on Halloween night to keep..." She stopped like she'd said too much. She had that nervous look in her eyes like everyone else he'd seen in town. "What?" he asked. Nothing." "Tell me." "You wouldn't believe me." They went back to the table in the kitchen, back to the light. Dennis opened another bottle of beer. "Tell me," he pressed. Kara sat down at the table. "It's kind of scary." "I could go for a scary story on Halloween night." There was nothing else to do here. No TV or internet, no cell phone service. And in the despondent mood Kara was in, he wasn't even going to suggest sex. She was quiet for a moment, like she was trying to find the right way to explain things. "We don't celebrate Halloween tonight. But there is this tradition we have." "The stick figures?" Dennis said. She nodded. "They're supposed to ward off the Coffin Man." Dennis almost laughed. He wanted to laugh, but a twinge of fear knifed through him from the expression on Kara's face. She was really scared. "The Coffin Man always comes on Halloween night," Kara said, her voice lower, eyes cast down. "We'll be okay as long as we stay inside." Dennis was quiet for a moment as he watched Kara. "Come on, you don't really believe that kind of stuff, do you?" She stared at him, dead serious now. "Whatever you do, don't peek out the windows tonight. If you hear noises outside, don't look. The Coffin Man will ride through town on his flat cart that's pulled by 2 black horses. He's dressed all in black with a black hood over his head, like an executioner. He has 4 lanterns on his cart at all 4 corners, and on the back there's a coffin. If he sees you..." She let her words trail off. Dennis wanted to ask how she knew what the Coffin Man looked like if no one was allowed to peek out the windows at him, but he didn't want to push his luck. She seemed different now. Not the same Kara he'd fallen for over the last 8 months. He wondered if she was really this disturbed from her grandmother's passing. She was alone now, but he promised that he would be there for her. They were both alone now, but they would always have each other. He got up and gave her a gentle hug, and then a kiss on top of her head. "Don't worry. I'll protect you from the Coffin Man." But Kara was not laughing. Dennis woke up in the dark. He and Kara had gone to bed around 9:30, sleeping in a guest room upstairs that he suspected used to be her bedroom when she was a child, even though she hadn't said as much. Moonlight managed to stream in around the curtains drawn over the window, and he saw that he was alone in the bed. He was thirsty, a little dehydrated from the 8 beers he'd downed earlier in the evening. He'd fallen into a fitful sleep next to Kara, but now she was gone. "Kara?" No answer. Maybe she'd gone downstairs, or she'd gone across the hall to her grandmother's room. He sat up and then got to his feet. Something had woken him. Some kind of noise. He checked his cell phone on the table next to the bed. It was 10:30. He'd only been asleep for an hour. He still didn't have cell phone service here, but he used the illumination from his phone like a flashlight to guide his way to the bedroom door. He stepped out into the hall. The door to Kara's grandmother's room was halfway open, and Dennis heard a noise coming from inside. Maybe it was the same noise that had woken him up. Kara? Still no answer. He crept across the hall, the floorboards creaking beneath his footsteps, ancient wood popping. He pushed the door all the way open and his phone shut off, plunging him back into darkness. Shit, he whispered and pressed the button to light up his phone again. He shined the meager light in front of him and entered the bedroom. Moonlight filtered in through the flimsy curtains over the row of windows that looked down onto the street. Kara wasn't in the room. Noises were coming from outside, a steady noise, and it took him a moment to recognize the sound. The clopping of horses' hooves. Dennis was drawn toward the windows, almost like he was in a trance. Before he even realized what he was doing, he had one of the curtains pushed aside. He stared down at the street and saw the Coffin Man. The lanterns on the cart illuminated the man dressed all in black. He sat on a buckboard with the reins guiding his horses in his gloved hands. He wore some kind of black mask over his face underneath a tall hat. And on the back of the cart was a simple wood coffin. The Coffin Man pulled gently on the reins, halting his horses. He stared up at the window, right at Dennis. Dennis let the curtain fall back in place over the window and backed away quickly. "You let him see you," Kara said from across the room. Dennis jumped, turning around to look at Kara in the doorway. "You scared the hell out of me," he breathed out as he lit up his phone again and walked toward her. And then he stopped. He saw the horror on her face. She was trembling, shaking her head no. She had a look in her eyes like all hope was lost now. "Kara? You weren't supposed to look out the window!" Her eyes were wide and moist like she was about to cry. "I told you not to look out the window!" "That guy out there. This has to be some kind of prank or something." A pounding sounded from downstairs. Someone was banging on the front door. Kara stifled a scream. "He's at the door now. He's going to keep coming for you. He won't stop. He'll never stop." "This is crazy," Dennis told her. "We need to call the police." He dialed 911 on his cell phone, but the call wouldn't go through. He still didn't have any service to his phone. "Does your grandmother have a phone?" he asked, even though he didn't remember seeing one. She shook her head no. The pounding downstairs was louder. It sounded like the man was going to break the door down. "Come on," Dennis said. He used his cell phone to light his way back to the guest bedroom. He found his jeans crumpled up on the seat of an antique chair and pulled them on, and then he slipped his feet into his sneakers. He made sure he had his car keys in his pants pocket. Kara was still fully dressed. They hurried downstairs. The pounding of the door was even louder down here. The large pane of glass in the front door rattled every time the Coffin Man beat on the wood with his fist. "Go away!" Dennis yelled at the man beyond the door. The Coffin Man looked tall. He looked bigger now that Dennis saw him up close. Just a black and bulky shape outside the door. "We called the police," he lied. The relentless pounding continued in a maddening rhythm. "Leave us alone!" Dennis yelled at the door. backing up deeper into the living room. The coffin man smashed his gloved hand through the glass in the front door, knocking the twig man Kara had hung on the door out of the way. He reached inside, groping for the doorknob. What the hell? For a moment, Dennis was too shocked to move, staring in disbelief as the coffin man twisted the lock of the doorknob, opening the door. This was no prank. Come on! Dennis grabbed Kara's wrist and pulled her into the kitchen. There's nowhere we can run to, Kara said, pulling back on Dennis. You shouldn't have looked out the window. I told you not to look! Stop it, Kara! He snapped. He pulled her toward the back door in the kitchen that led outside. They just needed to get around the house to the driveway, to his car. Once they were in his car, they could get away. They got to the door and Dennis heard the coffin man stomping through the house, getting closer. He pulled Kara outside, down the steps toward the side of the house. It still seemed like she was resisting, pulling on him as hard as he was pulling on her. When they were 20 feet away from the door, Kara yanked her hand out of Dennis's hand. What are you doing? He hissed at her. And then he saw the coffin man in the doorway to the kitchen. The coffin man just stood there, watching them. He's right behind you, Dennis told Kara. We gotta go! Kara stood in the darkness, the moonlight shining down on her, and Dennis saw the realization dawning on her. He only wants you, she said. Dennis heard a noise right behind him, the snapping of a twig from a footstep. He turned around and saw the coffin man right in front of him, a sickle gripped in the man's gloved hand. The last thing Dennis wondered was how the coffin man had gotten behind him so quickly. And then, the butt of the sickle's handle struck him in the side of his head, and the world went black. It was close to midnight when the coffin man drove his buggy toward the gigantic stick figure in the middle of the town square, the stick figure already ablaze, burning brightly in the night. The townspeople had gathered, all of the men dressed in black with hoods and hats. They were all the coffin man. Kara, now dressed in white along with all of the other women in town, watched as the coffin men unloaded the coffin from the buggy and laid it down on the bed of straw in front of the gigantic burning stick figure. She knew that the coffin had already been drenched in a resin that would allow it to burn easily. She could hear Dennis thrashing around inside the sturdy pine box, bashing himself against the walls, beating at the top of it, screaming. But there was no escape for him. Kara's grandmother approached her. She touched Kara gently, and then they watched together as some of the coffin men grabbed at the ropes attached to the giant stick figure and pulled it down on top of the coffin as the midnight bell rang from the church steeple. The coffin caught fire immediately. This sacrifice would help the town through the winter, appease the ancient gods in the spring, and make the ground fertile, allow for a bountiful harvest in the fall. Is this the last one for me? Kara asked her grandmother. No, my child. Bring us another sacrifice. Next Halloween.
My teeth clenched in a tight grimace as pain shot down my left arm. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before looking into my daughter Cassidy's face. The look of terror and helplessness etched into her features wasn't one I'd seen before. And as much as I wanted to buckle at the knees myself, I couldn't. The second she saw how terrified I truly was, it was all over for us. The only hope we had of making it was by staying calm, rational, and mainly alive. I allowed a lie to consume my face in the form of a gentle smile as I released her hand from my forearm. The small crescent indentions in my skin from her grip didn't surprise me, but the droplets of blood sure did. I wiped them away on a nearby shirt absent-mindedly, stroking Cassidy's cheek as I did so. Her eyes searched my face wildly for signs of what to do. This wasn't our first rodeo. Living in Florida puts you at risk for hurricanes for pretty much the last third of the year. But god damn it, this one wasn't supposed to hit us. I'm not an idiot. I know how to pay attention to weather alerts, the news, and all that other shit. Every year they show a clusterfuck of projections, graphs, noodle lines, and everything else to show the projected path of any tropical storm or hurricane. And I'm telling you, we weren't in any of them. For God's sake, we shouldn't have even lost power. But from the sounds I was hearing outside, we were all losing so much more. I'd been so lost in thought that I didn't notice Cassidy had latched back on until the stinging in my arm returned. My poor sweet girl, born without 1 ounce of hearing. As selfish as it sounds to say, there weren't many times I envied her condition. But now was certainly one of them. She was terrified enough without the swale of audible destruction taking place in our neighborhood. The pressure in the air was palpable, even to me. I couldn't imagine the type of things she was picking up on. She removed a trembling hand from my arm, taking the first 2 fingers on each hand and sticking out her thumbs before placing them together in a stacked, swirling motion. Sign language for hurricane. I placed a steady hand on her shoulder and nodded my head. I looked her deep in the eyes, moving my lips carefully to aid her understanding. It's going to be okay, Cassidy. Her father had been against learning to read lips, said life would be hard enough for her without having to learn all the extra bullshit. But I disagreed. Not because I wanted to make things hard for her, but because I knew she held the resolve and intellect to achieve anything that she wanted to. She'd signaled to me before that learning to read lips made her feel like she was in a secret club of sorts. It tickled her that out of a playground full of hearing children, she'd be able to get the scoop on the drama that belonged to the kids around the neighborhood. So many people focus on who is listening, that not many of them stop to think of who's watching. Now, don't get all excited, my kid's not one to stir the pot. She just likes to peek at what's inside from time to time. And if it makes her happy, then more power to it. My little girl ain't hurting anybody. However she feels comfortable being a part of the world is just fine with me. Her tender fingers returned my arm, tugging gently this time. For the briefest of moments, I was able to catch a stillness in the chaos, focusing intently. It seemed as if each tug from her hand was in sync with my own heartbeat. My eyes drifted down to hers, and what she asked me nearly brought tears to my eyes. Are we going to die? It wasn't something that I hadn't asked myself when I first realized how bad things would be. We don't have basements here to hide in, and from what I saw before the power went out, the quick-set shelters are almost literal mobs full of panicked and desperate people. Not to mention all of the reports in other cities of robberies during the last storm, both inside and outside of the shelters. That was one of the many reasons why Cassidy and I found ourselves in my walk-in closet, with my queen-size mattress barricading the doorframe. As much as I hate to admit it, I wasn't sure if we should be upstairs or downstairs. Both locations were at risk for causing harm. Were we going to die? Who the fuck was I to say? None of this was supposed to be happening. Period. As many thoughts such as those flew around my mind almost all at once, I refused to further traumatize an already petrified child. Leaning back to allow enough space between us to move freely, I told her as long as we make safe choices and stick together, we'd be able to make it through much worse things than this. A smile began to bloom across her cheeks as I bent to her level and assured her, "No one's doing any dying today, Butch." Butch was a nickname my father came up with for Cassidy. If I have to explain it to you, then you wouldn't get it anyway. Before too long, she told me that she needed to go to the bathroom, which happened to be not far from our front door. Was it the safest thing to do? Maybe not. But I wasn't quite sure we had reached pissing on the closet floor level of danger either. Either way, I figured she could go to the bathroom. I could grab some more closet snacks and peek out the front to see just exactly what we were all dealing with weather and damage-wise. "Don't pee your pants," I joked, reaching down under her arms to give her light tickles which sent her into body hiccups of giggles. Once I was sure I had her full attention, I made my best He-Man stance and kicked the mattress out from in front of the door. However, I wouldn't be in a silly mood for long. My room was swallowed in absolute darkness. It almost seemed to suck up the brightness from our flashlights. Relief began to set in once the living area was in full view, and I ushered Cassidy to the bathroom door. The setting sun, though in turmoil, still provided enough light to see by through the unboarded windows. Unfortunately, the relief I found in it was shallow and fleeting. The floor's surface, especially by the front door, looked slick and shiny. My heart sank at the almost inevitable reality that water was indeed getting into the house. I reeled at the unfairness of it all. A hurricane has never come this late in the year and almost teleported off path like this. My soul was saddened for our little town. The wind outside sounded like a malevolent entity, hungry, dark, and all-consuming. That always seems the most terrifying, doesn't it? When things seem to take on a dark mind of their own, I mean. A cacophony of splintering wood and broken glass blasted from an upstairs room. I instantly sprinted back over to the bathroom, signaling Cassidy to follow me upstairs. The impeding water would soon reach the bedroom we were hiding out in, and the last thing I wanted to do was keep an 8-year-old girl calm in ankle or even waist-deep water. Branches twisted unnaturally outside as Mother Nature had her way with them, and the floodwater was steadily rising. So I traded one set of risks for another and made my way upstairs to the upper bedrooms. As much as the roar of noise outside scared me, the sounds it left behind in its wake were much worse. My ears would have welcomed the Category 3 winds to come back and drown out the sound of desolate suffering, and maybe they would. But at that moment, all I heard were sobs, screaming, and the sound of more glass, with the most prominent seemingly coming from right outside Cassidy's bedroom window. The realization then dawned on me that my daughter and I weren't going through this alone. Other people and families were also trapped in the calamitous state of their homes. Involuntary grunts of pained bones escaped my lips as I lowered myself to the floor to look under Cassidy's bed. "Stay right here," I told her, only after surveying the area to make sure she'd be safe in my quick absence. I took tentative steps to the windowsill, taking a moment to be thankful for the wherewithal I had to have Cassidy and I put our shoes on beforehand to protect our feet just in case. Peering out, I could see that the water level had risen to mid-living room level of the surrounding houses. My gaze stopped when it met a pair of weathered, wide eyes. It was my adjacent neighbor, Mr. Adler. I wasn't too familiar or friendly with him, honestly. He had initially called Cassidy a rude child when she wouldn't answer a question he asked or respond to something he had said. I had to explain to him more than once that she was born non-hearing. But some people, if that's not their life, they don't give a fuck, right? Well, poor Mr. Adler was certainly singing a different tune this evening. He looked so frail, perched against the edge of his window. He was hollering something awful. Mr. Adler? I shouted. Are you hurt? He shook his head, fervently pointing to the water below. His voice was clear despite the distance. An emergency operator had told him that rescue workers couldn't report to the area until the conditions were calmed and the roads were clearer. I feared as much, which is why I hadn't bothered wasting my phone battery trying to fight through phone lines for help that was unavailable, albeit temporarily. The old man brought his foot up to meet the window ledge, and from the direction he was looking, it was clear he wanted to reach the roof. In God's name, he's gonna kill himself, I thought, terrified at the prospect of seeing him fall. I called out to him. You know I had to. And you also probably know that it was to no avail. God knows what was in that water, but I can sure as shit say I'd rather him take his chances swimming than trying to climb on the roof. These weren't apartment buildings. There was no staircase or door providing roof access. You had to get up there the hard way. When I say my heart leapt in my chest and froze there, I mean it. I literally felt a frigid lump lodge between my lungs as I watched him use his weight on that raised foot to stand, turning, trying to grab onto something to hoist himself up with. The writing was almost literally on the waterlogged walls. One way or another, he was ending up in that water. What in the hell was he thinking? I didn't know this man's medical history. There was no way to know if he was in his right mind or missing medication. There could be a number of things that led him to try to escape that way. It was dangerous enough being as high up as we were. If the water didn't get us, a falling tree sure as hell could. Stop! You're going to get hurt! I pleaded. He stopped what he was doing to turn his head and stare at me before gesturing below emphatically. Stuttered words flew through his lips faster than my ears could understand them. He kept pointing down at the water. I don't understand. Can you not swim? Mr. Adler shook his head emphatically, letting me know that swimming wasn't the issue. He shrieked as he noticed the water level actively rising. Unfortunately, I noticed it too. The rain still whipped around outside despite the semi-calmed winds. My entire being was torn between running back to Cassidy and staying put to literally talk my elderly neighbor off of a ledge. Frightened tears prickled the corners of my eyes, though I knew crying would solve absolutely nothing. How was I possibly supposed to help this man when I couldn't even help myself at the moment? I was far from a concern of his, that much was for sure. He had gone right back to attempting to climb out of his window in order to reach the roof. My heart beat frantically as I watched him with bated breath. It was like watching two cars, knowing it was unavoidable that they would crash. But there's just nothing that could be done. All I could do was stand there, motionless, waiting for this man's doom. A faint vibration hummed against the soles of my shoes, kissing my toes in quiet alarm. It was something I taught Cassidy when she was practically a toddler. The world is a busy place, sometimes even within the walls of your own home. If she needed my attention and for some reason couldn't get it visually, stomp on the floor. If someone was around and thought it was odd or rude, well, they could just go fuck themselves, couldn't they? All that mattered was that I knew, and my daughter knew. It was important for Cassidy to feel heard, especially since she wasn't able to do so. I knelt down beside the bed just as she raised her fist to pound on the floor. She stopped, mid-motion, and I honestly marveled at what a beautiful child she was. I was so blessed to have her. She wanted to know if it was safe to come out and look out the window. I told her she could come out, but had to stay away from all the glass in the house, especially windows. However, now that she brought it up, I couldn't help but think about Mr. Adler and his current situation. Waves of relief swelled through me when I saw he was no longer at his window. Hopefully, he'd gained the common sense to go back inside and seek help in another, safer way. And as I said before, I had next to no knowledge about this person. But if I had to guess, I'd have to assume that he lived alone. I did my best to scan the inside of the house for any activity, but regretfully saw none. There was one thing I did notice, though, that I was sure wasn't there before. A faint red streak kissed the bottom corner of one of the shutters that had managed to stay on despite the onslaught of wind and rain. I didn't want to do it at the time, and now I wish I hadn't. Maybe then Cassidy and I would be able to spend what could very well be our last moments, at least in this house, with a sense of togetherness and peace. But I did it. I looked down. Mr. Adler was laying face down in the watery grave that was once our shared bits of yard below. One arm was twisted and floated behind him at an unnatural angle, while the other remained tucked close to his torso. But his head... oh my God, his head. The top quarter of his skull was gone completely, and the other side wasn't in much better shape. The brittle neck bone that connected the two had obviously been broken in the fall as well. I'd watched 100 horror films, but had never even come close to seeing anything like this in real life. My stomach retched and I turned away to make sure Cassidy was out of his line of sight. There was no help for our poor neighbor. All we had to do was stay out of danger for a couple more days. As long as nothing big hit the house in the next 48 hours, we should be okay. I was just about to suggest that we move into another room when out of the corner of my eye, I caught something stirring outside. Now, I'd heard of sharks and gators and all types of other animals showing up in communities due to confusion by the flooding rains. My first fear was that something like that had decided to grab Mr. Adler, adding insult to already fatal injury. But no. A cracking sound resonated up to my window from below as my neighbor's bones jerked and quaked beneath his skin. The way he rose to his feet was akin to a puppet on a string. What was left of his head lolled to the side, resting on his shoulder and bobbing slightly with each unnatural movement. He took a few shaky steps through the water with searching, empty eyes. The moment he saw me, he took off like a bullet. His broken form sped effortlessly through the water, slamming into the side of my building over and over and over again. Cassidy and I have been up here for what seems like hours now, and the sun has long set. She isn't able to hear Mr. Adler slumping against the side building, but I had no idea if she could feel it. I've managed to get her to fall asleep for the time being. From the muffling of noise over time, it sounds like he's banging himself apart out there, or at least losing steam. He is far from my main concern, though. There are holes all throughout the roof. We can't seem to find dry shelter no matter what room we migrate to. I'm terrified of whatever is in that water to cause Mr. Adler to distort and deform the way that he did. But from what I saw out of my window, he's not the only one. I am desperate for help at this point. The rescue crews will hopefully be able to make their way out by boat in the afternoon. But until then, I'm terrified. Mr. Adler's still banging away and the water is pouring in. If you read this, there's something in the water. I don't know if you have to swallow it or if it can affect you by mere touch or even through a cut. But there's something in the water, and it wants to kill us.
Taking out the old man had been simple for Black Wolf. Locate, break in, kill him, and secure the body for transport. The job had been clean and bloodless, leaving no evidence. Once he'd finished the hit, he placed the target in a thick canvas bag and fastened the 4 restraints to hold the body in place. Satisfied that he had completed the most challenging part of the job, He looked around outside to make sure he wouldn't be seen. It was 2 in the morning, so he figured he was safe. He threw the bag over his shoulder and took it out the back door and into the alley. After Black Wolf dumped the body in the car's trunk, he poked it a couple of times to be on the safe side. It didn't move, thank God. He climbed in the front seat of his luxurious black sedan. I'll be glad when this job is over. There's some bad juju going on with this one. He lit a cigarette, tuned the radio to a classical music station, and drove away. His orders were to deliver the cargo to the nearest wet room. The site was hidden in some woods just outside the rear-view town of Wyattsville, a 3-hour drive. The team there would handle the final disposal. Black Wolf had made the trip many times. It was the perfect place for a drop, dark and secluded. He hoped that the others would have things ready to roll when he arrived with the former Eric Werner. He didn't like spending any more time in the woods than necessary. Even for a man with his background, the place was creepy, unholy. Black Wolf had been driving for 2 hours. One more, and he'd be near the site. It typically took around 5 hours for things to turn dangerous, so he was glad to find himself safely ahead of schedule. He decided to use the extra time to relax and put his mind on better things than the body in the back. He had always enjoyed the elegance and complexity of classical music. It helped to bring order to the chaos around him. As he conducted the orchestra with his free right hand, his stomach growled along, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in hours. There was an all-night gas station about 10 miles before his destination. He was so hungry that he was willing to roll the dice on an ancient wiener from a greasy rotisserie. He'd dropped in at the store he had nicknamed the Stop and Rob on many occasions and had gotten to know Jack, the old man who ran the place. Jack was a 3-time loser with felony convictions. He didn't burden himself with suspicions about the mysterious man with the sleek automobile that made occasional trips to the middle of nowhere. Black Wolf pulled up to one of the gas pumps, threw the car into park, and climbed out. The night air was thick and humid, coating his skin like warm mud. Smells were absorbed by its immensity, creating a dank fog, but he could just identify the pungent scent of the 2 young men loitering outside. Black Wolf sized them up. Greasy losers. They looked like a couple of 20-somethings with no luck and very few prospects. Their gangly necks and arms were home to cheap tattoos, their clothes ratty. He knew their species well, had been there himself once upon a time before the military straightened him out. When Black Wolf neared the gas station's entrance, one of the men stepped in front of him, causing a collision.
Sorry, mister.
Black Wolf didn't want any trouble this late in the game, so he just gave the scrawny stranger a glare of disapproval. Black Wolf walked through the smeary plexiglass door. The overly sweet stench of floor disinfectant made him queasy. He winced as his eyes adjusted to the uncomfortable brightness of the store. The harsh fluorescent light emitted a low hum that made his eardrums vibrate and gave everything a washed-out appearance.
Hey there, Jack.
Sup, young fella? Black Wolf checked out the encrusted rack of revolving francs at the end of the counter and decided to peruse the snack aisle instead. He settled on a bag of pretzels, some beef jerky, and a Red Bull from the wall cooler. Jack began ringing up the items.
That'll be $6.30.
Black Wolf's car roared as it rocketed out of the small lot. leaving behind a veil of gravel and dust. He slapped his jacket pockets, empty. Why that little? Angry and embarrassed, he turned to Jack.
Those two punks who are loitering outside. Do you know 'em?
Sorry to say I do. One of 'em's name is Curtis, I think. Can't remember the other one. Should I call the Popo?
No. I'll handle this. Any idea where they might be heading?
If I had to guess, I'd say that old abandoned farmhouse a couple mile up the road. Druggies sometimes use it as a shooting gallery. Black Wolf had an ace in the hole, the car's tracking device. He took out his cell phone, accessed the app, and waited. Soon the car's location appeared on the screen. It hadn't traveled far. Suddenly the dot turned left and slowed down.
Gotcha.
He looked at Jack.
Looks like you were right. They're somewhere just up the road a ways. That'd be the farmhouse, correct?
Yep.
Don't suppose you've a car I can borrow?
Jack pointed out the window at a rusty riding mower.
Seriously?
Black Wolf asked. Too many DUIs.
Guess I'm jogging.
You know, there's two of them and one of you, Jack said. Are you sure you don't want me to call the cops?
I think I got this.
So, you gonna kill them?
Nope. I'm gonna save them.
As Black Wolf huffed up the highway, Curtis and Razor were maneuvering the car down the narrow lane that led to the farmhouse.
Where should I park it?
Curtis asked. Pull it around back. We can put it in the barn, Razor replied. Curtis eased around the dilapidated two-story house and followed a worn dirt path about 30 yards to the rickety barn. Razor jumped out and swung open its large wooden doors. He entered first, using the car's headlights to light his path as he peered through the semi-darkness. Anybody in here? We ain't the cops. Just want to know if it's cool to come in. No one answered.
Hey, Raze, can I pull in or not?
Oh, we're clear. Razor stood near the entrance and guided Curtis inside. Once the car was entirely in, he pulled the door shut, then lit the 4 lanterns they kept stashed around the barn. Curtis sprang from the car and began circling it like a bird of prey. He ran his nicotine-stained fingers through his long, stringy hair. A huge smile stretched across his face.
Dude, I am so jacked right now. Can you believe this? Oh, man, what a score.
We gotta get Lil B out here to check this mother out.
He'll probably give us top dollar for it,
Razor said.
Shoot him a text. Let him know that. The hell was that?
Curtis asked. Equally startled, Razor said,
I think it came from the trunk.
They moved towards the rear of the car with the same stealth they used when breaking and entering. Hello? Razor asked. No reply. He lowered his head to the trunk and listened for a moment. The two jumped back.
Dude, I think somebody's locked in there,
Curtis said. The sedan rocked back and forth, its shock absorbers yelping.
Should we let him out?
Razor huffed.
Hell no. What's wrong with you?
Okay.
Let's just go outside, roll a couple of joints, and figure out what to do next. Yeah, okay. There ain't nobody around to hear no noise, so we're good.
They had walked about 10 yards when a metallic explosion rang out from the barn. A few seconds later, there was a heavy thud.
Whoa, what just happened?
Curtis asked.
I ain't sure, but we need to go check on the car. Something might have fallen on it. Like what? I don't know. Maybe something fell out the loft. Lil B ain't gonna be interested in no beat-up ride. Let's go together. It might be we need to mess somebody up.
They returned to the barn. The trunk hatch had been blown off and hung over the edge of one of the lofts, 15 feet up.
I don't know who was in the trunk, but they sure wanted out,
Razor observed. Curtis retrieved one of the lanterns and raised its wick. He inched toward the mangled opening of the trunk and looked inside.
Yo, check this out.
A shredded canvas bag covered the bottom of the trunk. Shattered metal buckles dangled from its thick straps. The whole space was dripping with thick red slime that smelled like oil and rotten meat.
This is messed up, Race. Let's get out of...
The shrill sound was deafening. Heavy footsteps moved around the loft. Then they heard something drop into the shadows. They didn't wait to find out what. The two ran from the barn and sprinted toward the dark farmhouse.
Run! We're dead meat out here in the open!
Curtis yelled. They busted through the back door and into the dark, grimy kitchen. Having participated in numerous parties and minor drug deals, they knew the layout of the house well. Curtis was holding the lantern in a death grip.
Check them drawers for a knife.
The wooden drawers fell to the floor as Razor yanked him from the base cabinet. All were empty, save for dust and dead bugs.
No luck.
From there, they went to the living room at the front of the house. Broken furniture was strewn about. The water-damaged ceiling sagged and cobwebs coated the corners of the ravaged room. They pushed a musty, mouse-infested couch away from the wall and hunkered down behind it. The damp, moldy material coated their lungs with every pant. "Do you hear anything?" Razor asked.
Shh. Be quiet.
The tall grass that ran along the side of the house rustled. There was a sniffing and snorting.
Is that thing trying to sniff us out?
Curtis whispered. The noise stopped. They waited. Something was climbing up the side of the house. They could hear chunks of wood being ripped away and dropping to the ground as the thing clawed its way to the second floor. An upstairs window shattered. Glass tinkled and feet thumped across the room directly over them. They froze, barely breathing. Wide-eyed, Curtis and Razor stared at one another as the thing clumped down the stairs, grunting and sniffing. The floor vibrated as it stomped around the living room. When it got to the couch, it stopped. Silence. Curtis extinguished the lantern. His muscles prepared to run. The thing gave a loud grunt as it grabbed hold of the couch. Cool air swept over them. The couch flew across the room and smashed into the far wall. A rancid stench assaulted their nostrils. A shadowy form crouched before them. As it rose, glass cascaded off its outer shell, and two dull, bulging eyes swiveled towards them. With its bony frame and grotesquely long arms and legs, it resembled a human-sized praying mantis. Thinly stretched human skin covered most of its spindly body. Its wrinkled head was that of an elderly man, the scalp punctuated with tufts of white hair. In its gaping mouth was an enormous, pink, pulpy maw with a flapping tongue in the middle. The two men screamed as the thing reared back. When it fell forward, it grabbed Razor with its hooked hands and flung him against the wall. His limp body dropped to the floor. Then the thing turned to Curtis. He was numb all over. The thing drew its arm back, preparing to strike. He closed his eyes, wondering how bad his death would hurt. He lamented his foolish life choices.
I'm so sorry, God, for everything.
Suddenly, there were two sharp pops. The creature cried out, and Curtis's eyes popped open. Curtis saw someone standing just inside the doorway in a shooter's stance. He recoiled as the shooter fired 2 more explosive rounds at the thing. Pieces of its shell clattered to the floor as it screeched and jumped upward, attaching itself to the ceiling. The shooter closed the distance until he was directly under the thing. He fired several more bullets into its body. The dripping man-monster clawed at the ceiling, raining plaster upon Curtis and the towering figure. It finally tore through and pulled itself up and into the room above them. In the gloom, Curtis couldn't recognize his savior right away. But as he dusted the plaster from his face, he realized it was the man whose elegant machine was now parked in the barn.
Please don't shoot me, sir. I'm sorry about the car, okay?
Forget about the car. I need to kill that thing, or a lot of people are going to die, starting with us.
What the hell is it?
It was still a man when I threw it in the trunk, but there's a short window of time before it morphs into that,
he said, pointing up.
I was well on my way to the disposal site when you and your idiot friend decided to go Grand Theft Auto on me. Now I'm gonna need your help. It's too much to handle on my own.
You got the wrong guy, mister. Look, my friend needs...
Leave him. Your friend's dead.
Curtis halted. The man was serious. If the man didn't kill him, the bug would. Black Wolf surveyed the battered room. He picked through the busted furniture until he found a table leg. He moved around the room, tapping on the ceiling and listening.
What are you doing?
I'm monitoring its movements.
After a few more pokes, they heard scuttling above them. Then it stopped.
It seems to be taking its time. Regrouping or hiding. I can't tell which. I don't think it's through with us yet. It likely sees you and me as an immediate threat to its escape. We need to contain it.
Curtis shook his head.
No way.
Listen, boy. If you've got the stones to steal my car, then you've got the stones to help me kill that freak before the worst happens.
The worst? As in, it ain't happened yet? What is that thing?
5 hours ago, that thing was Dr. Eric Werner. A microscopic piece of alien DNA outwitted him, some other dumb scientists, and a few pompous generals. Werner and his so-called geniuses studied it, experimented on it, and did some other sci-fi crap. Of course, they immediately saw dollar signs and military applications, but they didn't consider what that tiny group of cells might evolve into. It's like looking at a strange egg and not knowing what's gonna pop out of it. Well, now we do. It's making up its mind.
About what?
The most efficient way to kill us. Unless we kill it first. That's the choice I prefer.
Curtis gulped.
Are you out of your damn mind? Let's just get out of here and let some other fools handle this.
Ignoring Curtis, Black Wolf followed a noise above him, prodding the ceiling as he went. With every jab, the thing moved.
Who are you, man?
Curtis's voice trembled. Continuing to track his prey, Black Wolf said,
Some other elite trackers and I were brought in to hunt and kill these things while they're still human and manageable. Once that's done, their bodies are delivered to lab wonks who know how to dispose of them. Things have to happen fast, though.
There was more movement above them.
What happens if you don't get the body there in time?
First, it turns into what killed your friend. Then that worst I mentioned comes next.
Do you think you can kill it?
Don't know. haven't dealt with one in that stage of development.
Black Wolf stabbed the ceiling hard and the thing ran. They heard it enter another room, slamming the door.
Bingo. We got it,
Black Wolf said.
How many of those things are out there?
So far, we've only located a handful of infected outsiders and lab folks. We took them out before they advanced too far. Now, I've got to somehow ice Alien up there and get it to our local disposal site before things really go south. Does that satisfy your curiosity?
I wish you hadn't told me. Will you kill me if I run?
This is a highly classified initiative. What do you think? Good news is, there's a way out of this for you if you do as I say.
Curtis sighed.
What do you want me to do?
It's closed itself off in a room at the top of those stairs. I need you to go up and get its attention. When it comes after you, lead it back down, and I'll use some high-impact rounds to penetrate its skull. Questions?
Since this is classified, how do I know you won't shoot me when this is all over?
'Cause I always keep my word. But if I ever get wind that you've been shooting off your mouth, I'll come back and kill you myself. I think we both know that the only reason you're going up there is to save your skin. So if this works, I'll owe you your life. Can you work with that?
Curtis nodded.
Let's just get this over with.
Black Wolf began loading the gun's magazine while Curtis grabbed the lantern and climbed the creaky stairs.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus.
Curtis's legs were shaking, his teeth chattering. Icy sweat slid down his back like cold fingers as he inched closer to the room where he did not want to go. When he reached the second floor, Curtis stopped and listened. It'd been quiet for too long. He wondered just how cunning the humanoid was. He tiptoed to the room where they had last heard the creature, a bedroom. He threw open the door and stepped back, expecting an assault. When none came, he eased his head into the dusky room and looked around. In the dimness, he could make out a filthy mattress on the floor surrounded by cigarette butts, used syringes, and empty liquor bottles. Seeing nothing of the Werner bug, he entered. Curtis stepped in a puddle of dark goo.
Why won't this thing just die?
He followed the trail to the en-suite bathroom, where he found the door ajar.
You got this, man.
He took a deep, shaky breath, as if he were preparing to take a high bungee dive. When he was ready, he eased the door open and leaned inside. A thick string of drool dropped on the floor in front of him. He looked up at the bathroom ceiling. Curtis jumped back just in time to avoid being crushed. He screamed and bolted from the room. He flew down the stairs 3 at a time as the creature lumbered after him. The air behind him moved as the thing swung its powerful arm, giving a loud bark each time it missed. Black Wolf was at the base of the stairs waiting to fire. Seeing him, Curtis felt equal parts panic and relief. Wet chunks of brain and bone splattered over the staircase. Curtis barely made it over the railing and out of the way of the howling beast as it tumbled down the stairs behind him. The broken creature flopped at Black Wolf's feet. He fired 3 more enhanced rounds into what was left of its exposed skull. Thick blood squirted from its shattered head, the flow decreasing with every fading heartbeat. A long, fetid breath marked its end.
Oh my God! Is it dead?
Black Wolf kicked the carcass with the tip of his heavy boot.
Yeah, it's dead. Now go to the barn and look for anything we can use to tie it to the car. Then pull around to the front. Hurry!
Curtis was too stunned to move, so Black Wolf went over and pulled him to his feet.
You're gonna be fine. Just let the adrenaline settle down. Now, go and get...
A wet tearing sound came from the dead monster.
Oh no,
Black Wolf muttered.
What do you mean, oh no? Is it dead or not?
Black Wolf eased back over to the carcass. He turned on his small mag light and shined it on the twisting face. Its jaws cracked apart, ripping the surrounding skin like cellophane. 3 thick spider-like legs appeared on each side of the monster's mouth, spreading it wide. An oily black object the size and shape of a baseball pulled itself out of the ruptured opening and crawled onto the dead creature's chest. It looked like a clawless crab with 2 eyes attached to short stalks. It hissed at Black Wolf.
What's happening?
Curtis pleaded.
Is that...
the worst.
Black Wolf raised his gun and began firing, but the alien arachnid jumped out of the way with a blurry speed. It charged forward, working its way toward Black Wolf, forcing him and Curtis to back up against one of the living room walls. Black Wolf kept firing until the gun's chamber sprang forward and clicked.
Oh God, this is it, isn't it?
Curtis barely recognized his own voice.
Please let it be quick. I don't want to feel that thing biting me, infecting me.
The shimmering creature crawled toward them, its dagger feet clicking on the warped wooden floor. Black Wolf hurled his gun at the creature, unsurprised when he missed. He tried to move to his left and right to get around it, but by hopping from side to side, it blocked his path before he could complete a whole step. When the monstrosity was 6 feet from them, it reared back, exposing 4 dripping mandibles. It lurched forward. Curtis and Black Wolf jolted. Razor came up behind the creature, hammering it repeatedly with a long metal lampstand. Red and yellow gunk squirted out, some spraying onto Curtis's sneakers.
So, what'd I miss?
The 2 kids waited in the back seat of Black Wolf's sedan while he torched the farmhouse. Curtis figured it must be necessary to destroy all evidence of the monster. While they waited on Black Wolf's return, he filled Razor in on everything that had happened while he was unconscious. The information had Razor contemplating every possible meaning of the term grave concern.
"Do you think he's gonna have to kill us?"
Razor asked.
"This is some born identity kind of stuff." "No, I think this guy'll cut us loose. He just seems like the type. Dangerous but reasonable. He had a job to do, that's all, and we helped him do it. So all we gotta do is convince him we'll keep our mouths shut. I think he'll be cool with that."
Curtis looked out the rear window and saw the silhouette of Black Wolf sprinting across the way as the house blazed behind him. Black Wolf jumped in the front and slammed the door shut, then sat silently for a good long while.
So, boys, what happens next?
Curtis was too nervous to answer him. Razor said, "I don't know. Well, what are our choices?"
Well,
Black Wolf began.
I can take you back to that crappy little convenience store and let you take your chances. Or you can come with me.
Razor swallowed.
"Where would you take us if we went with you?"
Black Wolf smiled.
I never would have thought it, but you boys showed some spunk back there. You might suck at everything else in life, but you know how to slay a dragon, by God. I figure you 2 now have more experience than the general public in handling freaks of science. So, you want to join the organization? It's plenty dangerous, but as they told me in the Marines, it's not just a job, it's an adventure.
Razor and Curtis looked at one another as if to divine the other's response to the unusual job offer. Does it pay good? Razor asked.
The organization wants its trackers focused on the job, so you'll never be distracted by want.
Black Wolf answered.
Anything else?
Curtis relaxed his body, placed his hands behind his head as a cushion, and let the plush leather seat absorb his lean frame.
Yeah, I got one. Will we get a sweet ride like this one?
Actually,
Black Wolf chuckled.
You can have this one. It just needs a new trunk.
He started the sedan's engine and backed out of the barn and up the dirt path before stopping at the rough 2-lane road. Hanging a ride out of the property, he drove the two 20-somethings with very few prospects away from the rear-view town of Wyattsville.
Chapter 1. Man's Best Friend. The sound of Dwayne's Dodge diesel pounded a steady thump with a deep cadence as it idled up the dirt drive to the barn. The sun was setting, but it still hung just above the ridge that rose above their farmhouse. No snow yet, but Dwayne's bones shivered deep as his chilled hands gripped the steering wheel while it jerked back and forth from the tires wrestling the ruts. He glanced down at his grip. His fingers began to cramp. Damn cold arthritic joints seemed to let him know that winter was a-comin' nowadays after turning 50. He could feel snow before it ever came, and it would be here before Thanksgiving, which was about 2 weeks out. He scanned the fence line looking for old Tick, his short American bulldog and pit mix, who always sat at the top of the hill by the barn waiting if he hadn't been lucky enough to get to ride with him. Surely he hadn't run off again. Damn portly friend was smarter than he should be in some ways, but dumber than a box of rocks in others. But he and Tick were true friends through and through to the end. As the Dodge slowly pulled up to the barn, Dwayne eased the gear shift into park and scrutinized his surroundings once more. Nope, no fat dogs sitting and waiting today. Dwayne's wrinkled cheeks stretched a bit from the smile growing as he had thought of last summer's escapades, battling wits to keep Tick from slipping out and wreaking havoc. Scott Maynard, his neighbor, and he had shared some harsh words over Tick, frolicking on Scott's place. According to Scott, the neighbor to the east, Tick was growing quite an appetite for chicken. Live chicken. Scott's chickens. Good boy, Tick. He quietly snickered as he sat, letting past thoughts mingle in his head. That damned neighbor's chickens and roosters were always causing a damned racket over here, waking him and Annalene up too early every single morning. Only difference was, he weren't no prick about it. So, if Tick could sneak over and take one out occasionally, things was square in his thoughts. He reminisced digging the trench around the backyard and laying that invisible fence wire to keep old Tick at home and away from the chicken ranch. The sad look his faithful boy wore as he cinched the transmitter collar around his chubby neck. This ought to keep you hunting ass at home and away from that asshole's chickens. Another snicker ended with a guffaw. I hate to do it, boy, but Scott'd just soon pepper your butt with birdshot or more. And I love you, buddy, but I ain't gonna pluck pellets out of your round ass. I'd do the world for you, boy, but your hind end is off limits, a bridge I refuse to cross. The next day, after pulling up the drive and heading into the house, had Dwayne scratching his head when Tick weren't there waiting at the back door. His wife, Annalene, laughed as she told him the story about Tick. Dwayne, that dang dog of yourn is smart as a fox. I was out back in the screened-in porch reading my book, and I kept hearing this high-pitched squeal. It sounded like it was a mouse coming from inside of Tick. He was laying as close to that trench he had dug as he could. Pretty soon that noise began to fade, and old Tick got up from the ground and slowly walked over the pile of dirt and headed Scott's way with nary a care. It didn't make him yelp like the first time or two. Dwayne smiled to himself. His smart bully had somehow figured out he could lay next to the invisible fence to let his collar beep with the warning sound telling him he was about to get a shock if he moved closer. That critter just laid there until the damned battery went dead. No more shock left in the collar. I knew that dog was smarter than the average pooch, Dwayne answered. Nevertheless, Scott's gonna shoot your smart dog. I suppose Tick ain't as brainy in the long game as he thinks. As Dwayne sat daydreaming, he began to smell the diesel fumes leaking up into the cab strong, but he was deep down memory lane and smiled as he had concocted the next way to outsmart Tick. He pulled that collar off, and Tick looked up at him like he had won the battle. Little did he know, but Dwayne had just drilled a hole in that danged old speaker so it couldn't give no warning sound no more. Next morning, Tick didn't know what to do when he wrapped that collar back around his woollied neck and marched him out the back door and turned to leave without him. Dwayne felt so damned proud of himself, even if he did see Annalene shaking her head in disbelief. How much you spend on all that stuff Tick is making you tear up, Dwayne? Maybe you ought to just take your furry friend with you, instead of matching wits with him. That was all his little old sweet potato had to say to him, but Dwayne was satisfied with his line of action. He'd finally fixed the problem, for a day or two. Annalene told him that third evening she had never seen old Tick move as quick as he did. It was as if Tick knew if he just bolted across that trench and kept going, the electric sting would only bite for a second and then let go and be gone. Hell, Dwayne was just about ready to shoot old Tick himself, but with the holiday coming, he reckoned he felt soft about losing such a smart dog. Dwayne shook his head with the thought and smirked. He knew he couldn't ever get rid of Tick. Tick was his best bud. A damned holiday miracle happened instead. Before he knew what he was doing, Dwayne's finger had dialed up the Maynard's number after he decided to invite him to Thanksgiving dinner for he had time to change his mind. Dwayne felt just as surprised as Annalene's face showed shock when she heard words she had never guessed would come out. It's time to mend differences and be neighborly. Don't ask me why, Annalene. It just happened. If the Pilgrims and Indians could do it, he paused, I can by God do it. Dwayne Lee Johnson, Jr. Annalene shook her head as she continued walking up to him, arms opening up to hug him. You never cease to give me warm shivers. Her eyes warmed and she licked her lips seductively. I reckon my cockles are warmed up tonight. She pulled him in and leaned in toward his ear, her lips brushing against it. Warmed and frisky, baby. He smiled and reached around to give a squeeze to her backside. I'm old and grumpy sometimes, but I ain't dead nor blind. I still got wants and needs. He smiled. Chapter 2. Husband's Bestest Friend. Dwayne had put the happiest smile on Annalene's face she had worn in a long time. She was nestled into his chest before she rolled over to be face to face. I thought I had lost you for good to that damn dog for certain. She grinned. I know they say man's best friend is his dog. I was beginning to think it was true. She ran her finger down Dwayne's chest. What's up with you? Inviting my family to Thanksgiving? Hell, inviting the Maynards? She looked deep into her husband's eyes. What's going on inside that brain of yours, Dwayne Lee? I mean, I like it. Dwayne drew a deep breath before letting it out slowly. He cupped his hand over Annalene's and inhaled again. You ever feel like there's something dark hanging over your head? I'm not sure what you mean. You feeling down or? I don't know. I just feel different. Been full of anger lately and venom spitting out of my mouth all the time. Maybe it's just the season or something, but lately I've been feeling like I'm taking life and all I got for granted. Remember about this time last year when I found who we thought was Tick, all bloody and dead in the doghouse? I was sure I'd lost my buddy. I mean, how many other black and white bully pits could be out here on our road? Annalene smiled somberly. I know, Tick is one of a kind. I remember how devastated you were when you came in to tell me he had wandered back and had been hit and was gone. Her eyes teared just a bit. I'll never forget how you looked, Dwayne. I thought I might as well have lost you too. I remember how frozen the damn ground was and how long it took me to dig that big of a hole, especially with my eyes so full of tears. What's making you think of that awful day, Dwayne? Don't know, Annalene. This past week or two, I've been feeling sorry for myself, and then suddenly, I'm realizing how much I have to be thankful for. Like you. I take you for granted so dang much, and Dick coming back like a miracle, even though his Houdini tricks piss me the hell off constantly. Dwayne, I'll never forget after you came in all sweaty, even though it was below freezing after you buried Dick. Hearing that scratching on the back door. I know, Annalene. It was like we were being haunted by his ghost. Remember how we both stared at each other? You looked at me like, am I crazy? Dwayne guffawed. You got up so sudden, even though you were dead tired and frozen. We both got to that back door pretty darn fast. Annalene began running her fingers down Dwayne's chest again. You flung that door open and there he was, back from the dead. Annalene snuggled in and kissed her husband's lips, giggling from the mustache and beard hairs tickling. There he was, wanting in like he'd just been let out to pee. Dwayne kissed Annalene, running his tongue across her bottom lip. I know, babe. I never figure out whose dog I buried that cold and frigid day. I'm just glad it wasn't Tick. He leaned into Annalene's ear. Tick may be my best friend, but you, Annalene, are my bestest friend. Tick moaned a low, growly grumble as if he were listening from outside the door and objecting to being his master's second fiddle. Dwayne got up to let him in, and just before he opened the bedroom door, he turned back to Annalene. Get ready, sweet potato, 'cause here he comes. As the door was opened, Tick bullied his way through and flew up and onto the middle of the bed, claiming his spot between them. Chapter 3. The Dinner Guests. Scott looked over at his wife, Mary. What the hell is going on? Have you been talking to Annalene and cooking this whole Thanksgiving dinner thing up? Hell no, Scott. I'm still wondering why you agreed for us to go. He caught me off guard, so much I even agreed to smoke some meat to bring over. I'd smoked some chickens, but that damn dog has already ate several of them. The way I understand it, Annalene's sister and husband will be there too. The whole damned goody-good bunch. Should I break out some venison? And waste good meat on them? You're kidding, right? Well, I ain't gonna go buy nothing. Why did you say we'd bring the main course? Chips or something would have been better. A green bean casserole or rolls. Hell, the meat's the most expensive part of dinner. You ought to cook up something gross like snake or roadkill. She cackled. Kill that fucking dog of theirs that keeps killing our chickens and smoke his ass for their Thanksgiving party. Mary squinted at Scott with an evil sneer. Now that would be some funny shit there. Watching that geezer eat his own damn dog. Scott laughed out loud. Now that I could do. If he shows his damn pork butt over here before next Thursday. They both laughed hysterically. Hell, I may coax that fat turd over myself with a chicken. Mary sounded as she appeared to have a thought. You know. Scott looked over. Uh-oh. Looks like you got those evil cogs in your head going. I'm just a-thinking we can make this little neighborly get-together real interesting. I like the sound of your wicked tone. Be great if those old farts never felt the urge to call us back again. Never have liked them since we moved to the neighborhood. Old farts think they know everything, and that damn chicken-eating dog. Scott's scowl changed to wonder. What kind of idea do you have brewing, Mary? Oh, I have the perfect casserole that will go along with smoked bulldog. We'll bring them a special meal they will be so thankful for. It'll be a Thanksgiving meal none of them will ever forget. Mary's eyes were dark yet glimmered with joy. You just get that stupid dog of theirs in your smoker. I'm going to use some of our mushrooms for a tasty side dish. Mary's laugh was insidious. Chapter 4. Tick is gone again. Dwayne rolled up the drive and right off the bat noticed Tick wasn't at the barn waiting. Old Tick must be getting too long in the tooth to sit outside in the cold. Dwayne parked the old Dodge and gave a quick look-see around the barn. He shook his head. I'm gonna start bringing you with again. Annalene was at the door to greet Dwayne as he stood in the coat room taking off his Carhartt and boots. The time change was making it darker sooner, which made the days feel colder and more depressing. Annalene knew Dwayne's mood was changing. He needed sunlight to keep his spirits up the more the years passed. Tick asleep in the living room? He asked. No, I thought you had taken him with you today. I haven't seen him since early this morning. I've been busy all day with getting all the fixings together for Thursday. I hope he hasn't disappeared over to the Maynards again. And just before our big meal. Dwayne headed for the back door. After walking out on the screened porch and glancing around the yard, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. It was followed with a feeling of dread. Hey, Dick, he yelled out. Come by, boy. Touched his middle finger and edge of his thumb to his lips and sharply blew, causing the loud whistle that usually brought Dick running around the corner of the house. He waited several seconds and attempted again. Nothing. Dwayne hesitantly closed the back door and moped through the kitchen. He didn't answer, Annalene. Give him a while. He's probably out scrounging the barn or shed. Hope to God he isn't terrorizing chickens. It'll be difficult to have a peaceful dinner with Scott and Mary shooting daggers at me with their eyes. Wednesday morning, Dwayne was up before sunrise, walking around his property looking for Tick. At 8 a.m., he was in the living room with the phone to his ear, listening to the ring sound, hoping Scott would answer with news he could live with. No, Dwayne, haven't seen him. Chickens have been quiet all week. Looked over at Mary and smiled a devilish grin. So, we still on for Thanksgiving? Yeah, I'm sorry. Hope he shows up soon. Maybe he's out frisking with a hot little blue heeler or something. All right, we'll be there tomorrow around noon with some smoked brisket and Mary's favorite casserole. Looking forward to it. Yep, you too. Good luck. Click. Chapter 5. A Thanksgiving to Remember. Just before the Johnsons' door opened, Mary reminded Scott, Don't eat the casserole. Put a small amount on your plate and bury it under some other dishes, unless you want the trip of a lifetime. Gotcha, babe. And unless you like meat other than beef, stick to the top layer on the plate. He snickered. The door swung open and Annalene was there to greet Scott and Mary. Come on in, neighbors. This is my little sister Claire and her husband Ben. They live over in Duke County, just past Stack's Mill on Turner's Corner. Nice to meet y'all. I'm Scott Maynard and this is my sweetheart Mary. We just moved in next door about a year and a half ago. This is real nice you included us, Dwayne. Annalene. Can I take those dishes out to the kitchen? Annalene asked. They smell wonderful. I sure enough hope they meet up with your standards. They're both Scott's favorites, Mary answered. Hope you don't mind a little beer drinking with some football on the tube, Scott. Kind of the family Thanksgiving tradition around here, stated Dwayne. Football, beer, brisket, and the fixins? Life don't get no better. Scott smiled as he responded. His face faked a somber transition. Did your pup show up? He asked with drippy concern. Dwayne's mood dimmed. Nah, I'm still hoping he's just pulling another couple of all-nighters with one of the neighbor's bitches in heat. With any luck, there'll be little cloned puppies come spring. He tried to smile, but if he knew Dwayne, one could tell he was hurting inside. Have a seat, Scott, and I'll grab you a beer, Annalene said. Mary, you can come out to the kitchen with Claire and I or watch football out here. Table's already set and I'm just doing some last-minute touches. Ben laughed at whatever joke was told. The truth was, he had had several beers and didn't really hear what was said. It's hard to hear with all the hen cackling going on in the kitchen. Scott and Dwayne both chuckled. Dwayne's appeared a bit forced. Dwayne, I'm sure sorry about your dog. What was his name? His name is still Tick. He'll be back. He has a habit of flying the coop occasionally. Dwayne intentionally tied Tick's disappearance to the word coop. He had felt Scott was trying to be coy, and something about his demeanor today made him sorry he had ever invited him. He didn't want the tension to grow, but he wouldn't put up with any shit from some young move-in. He glanced out to the kitchen where he caught a glimpse of Annalene. She gave him a subtle look, and he winked back at her with an everything-is-fine look in his eyes. Dinner was served, and the table was full of a variety of dishes sitting on the lazy Susan in the middle of the table. Annalene stood before anyone began serving and spoke. This tradition may be new to our guests. She nodded at Scott and Mary. But we've always gone around the table and spoke one thing we are thankful for in this year of life that is about to turn the page onto the next. I'll start. I'm personally thankful that this year we have new additions to our tradition. Thank you for Scott and Mary. There was silence around the table. Dwayne cleared his throat and then there was a brief hesitation. I normally suck at this kind of thing. I'm a quiet, well-weathered old guy, and I reckon I'm already, the most fortunate man that there ever was. I was blessed with a woman who I truly don't deserve. She stuck by me through it all. She still loves me with all my faults. I'm thankful. I'm blessed. I'm also saddened on this blessed day, but damn it, I'm hungry too. Annalene, I love you, sweet potato. Always will. Tick, you damned old cantankerous friend, get your ass home. And last but not least, pass that brisket as quick as possible. Silence again. I guess I'll just say the obvious, Ben began. I love my wife, Claire. Married into a much more stable and loving family than I ever came from. I'm thankful for that. Great in-laws, wonderful wife, nice farm, and now some new friends. Prayers Tick makes it home, 'cause I know how much he means to Dwayne. Amen. I just echo what my wonderful husband just said. I'll add that I'm thankful Scott and Mary are here to share this meal and day with us too. Claire pinched her eyes closed even tighter. Scott cleared his throat and quickly began speaking. I wasn't sure what this day was gonna bring, honestly. We ain't been the best of neighbors, and I'm feeling a bit ashamed of that fact at the moment. My wife and I aren't the easiest people to get to know, and I realize that. I'm thankful that these people saw past our unneighborliness and invited us, nonetheless. I'm thankful and hope everyone enjoys this day and what the unknown can bring. Mary snickered under her breath. She fidgeted a moment before stuttering, I ain't no public speaking kind of person. This has been eye-opening, and I'm hoping everyone eats up and enjoys. The way I see it, we all gonna have moments we ain't expecting. I just say be thankful for whatever they bring, understanding them or not. Sometimes it's those experiences you don't expect that bring you the clearest answers you didn't even know was questions. And I guess that's all I got to say about it. Dig in and eat up. Amen. Annalene spun the dishes on the Lazy Susan over to the newest guests. Your special company, you go first. No, ma'am, you're the host. I insist you start. All the trouble you went to and to include us, I insist. Scott then spun the main course to Annalene. Everyone took turns serving themselves the food that was in front of them. Scott looked around and noticed that everyone's plates were full of the smoked meat and casserole he and Mary had brought. The conversation lulled occasionally as everyone enjoyed tasting the different dishes. Scott, this smoked brisket is really good. It's flavorful like I've never tasted before, and very tender, Annalene commented. Do you have a special marinade? Ben asked. Scott smiled before he answered. Yes, I do. It's a special family secret recipe. So y'all like the flavor? Some people say there's a bit of a bite to it, but I think it's tasty. No bark at all. Claire chimed in. This casserole is wonderful too. Is this egg and mushrooms? Mary nodded. Again, like Scott said, it's my family's recipe. I'm glad you like it. Eat up. I don't want to take anything home. This was made just for you folks for your kindness. This is beef brisket, right, Scott? Dwayne asked. Yep, 100% right out of the pit. He glanced at Mary. It has an odd texture. Very good, though, Dwayne complimented. The conversations remained steady, each complimenting the other's offerings as the bowls, dishes, and pans each became less and less full. 20 minutes later, Scott and Mary began noticing eyes becoming glossier and the grins becoming wider across the other guests' mouths. The fun was just about to begin. Scott was questioning his motive after the warming and thankful comments that had been shared just before the meal began. But it didn't take long to stir the memories of Dwayne's damned bully pit wreaking devastation on his chickens and the lack of care Dwayne showed when he had complained about his dog. Mary, on the other hand, was enjoying herself watching as the others began tripping. She knew Annalene had been very judgmental about her and Scott when they moved in. She had heard talk about Annalene questioning others in town because of all the visitors they received and the odd hours she and Scott kept. Damn busybody old bogies, she quietly thought as she began realizing they were beginning to see trails in their vision in the movement of their hands and arms when gesturing in conversation. The grins and giggles were beginning to overtake the unsuspecting victims. It wouldn't be long before they would be putty in her hands. Their good trips would be redirected into nightmares. Mary giggled both at the thought and the sight of the show before them. Knowing Dwayne was eating his favorite dog in the world gave her butterflies in her stomach. If he only knew. But he sure as hell would find out very soon. Dwayne sliced another bite from the strip of dog that lay across his plate, his now dilated pupils filling up his entire eyeballs. Mary looked at Scott and winked. Scott smiled and shook his head as he eyed the long carving knife laid beside the dish of meat. His eyes skimmed across the 4 oblivious dupes that were quickly sliding out of reality into the wacky antics of psilocybin mushroom world. He looked over at the dish and then to Mary. You must have really sweetened the taste of your casserole, honey. These clowns really cleaned their plates. I'm thinking they're way overdosed. He laughed wickedly. He got up and excused himself to the bathroom as he winked once more to his wife. His plan was to run outside to his truck and collect the zip ties he had gathered for the late afternoon activities. Annalene began to say something to Scott but looked over at her sister and broke into uncontrollable giggles. Ben and Dwayne began to speak, but neither seemed able to spit their words out correctly. They too quickly began laughing, their mouths grinning so widely from cheek to cheek their faces began to look as if they'd split. This seemed to add to Claire's laughter, which drew Annalene into the collection of hysterical cackles. As Scott exited the front door, he smiled at Mary, acknowledging her expertise in the plan for retribution against the Johnsons for being less than welcoming a year and a half ago when they moved in next door. She mouthed the sentence very clearly to him before he walked out. I get to slit that fucking bitch's throat. She's mine. And then she blew a kiss to her man as the storm door slammed closed with a loud thwack and brought a quick silence that turned into more uproar of laughter when nothing else happened. Chapter 6. Animated Perspectives. Dwayne shook his head back and forth while he sat at the table. He looked at the can of beer that stood firm beside his nearly empty plate. He stared blankly as the colors and textures of the piles of leftovers gently began to move and mix, forming what appeared to be a new life form from some alien planet. He snickered to himself, but deep down, he felt a brewing fear. His heart was racing, forming excitement within, but his muscles and tendons to cause movement were dueling with his brainwaves. The signals were crossing, and he knew it. It caused frustration, but then the need to laugh overtook him again. The beer can was becoming a tall silo sitting on the table. It begged him to pick it up to take a sip, but his lack of coordination would not allow it to be. He knew the world he was now entrapped was not the world he had known earlier in the day. He feared this world would be the one he was lost in forever. And while that should create fear within, he felt another barrage of laughter building and ready to overflow from his insides. He scanned the room for his sweet potato, Annalene. He felt like he needed to protect her. Noises of the football game in the living room began to build louder, and as it blended or churned into the laughter and sounds of people talking around the table, it became impossible to divide one sound from the other and understand what was happening. Dwayne was stuck in a world he couldn't fathom, and it was building into a panic that was pushing his heart into overdrive. Annalene's laughter ended abruptly. It was as if a door slammed loudly or the clap of thunder snapped her brain into an abrupt stop. Her eyes were as wide as saucers as she scanned the area, dividing familiar faces with those that didn't fit completely into her psyche. The front door slammed again and drew her attention. Annalene knew it was the neighbor, but somehow couldn't remember him leaving the table. Her mind stirred, trying to piece together the previous moments. It was as if the jigsaw puzzle she had just finished were now scattered about on the floor for no reason. Ben and Claire sat talking and giggling with each other as if no one else were present in the room. And Mary, Scott's wife? The smile she boldly wore scared Annalene. She was clueless why, but her urge to laugh was suddenly transformed into the need to scream for help. Scott walked up behind Dwayne and slipped pieces of plastic around his wrists and then pulled his hands behind him. Dwayne looked stunned but made no attempts to resist. Scott then walked around the table and did the same thing to Ben before he knew what was happening. There was nothing but confused silence as each of the family members sat still, glassy eyes with large dark pupils lost in the middle of their large white orbs. Scott zip-tied Claire's hands together and then worked his way further around the table to Annalene, where in her stunned state, held her hands up to be hog-tied also. Mary scooted her chair away from the table and slowly stood up. She walked over to Scott and they both looked into each other's eyes. "Oh, baby, I told you this would work out perfect." She smiled and then moved her lips closer to his before sliding her tongue out and teasing Scott. Everyone sitting confined at the table watched in confusion. A snicker slipped out of Ben's mouth before he let the words spill. "You guys gonna do it right here in front of us?" Silence. Scott pulled back from his wife's lips and grip. He slowly walked over and picked up the pan of meat. He walked over to Dwayne and stopped as he stared at him. He set the plate in front of Dwayne and then took a fork and knife and began cutting a bite-sized piece of the brisket. "You really enjoyed the flavor and tenderness, didn't you?" he questioned Dwayne as he lifted the fork and brought it up to Dwayne's mouth. "You like another bite? See if you can't taste something familiar." He released a low, rumbly, and raspy guffaw. "It certainly was satisfying smoking this meat. In fact, it's the first time I've ever skinned dog and marinated it for the smoker. I must admit, though, I myself did not taste it as a true chef would to make sure it was satisfactory, as I don't believe I'd care for canine." He smiled again. "But by the way y'all ate it up, I'm guessing old Tick made quite a tasty main course. Hell, he probably has a flavorful undertone of chicken, too. As many of mine as he fucking ate." It took a few moments for Scott's statement to take hold. Their fucked up minds just couldn't process what the sentence really meant. It was Claire, whose stomach first began to heave up and down. Her face first pale white before becoming shades of yellowish green. "You ain't gonna make a mess on Annalene's dinner table, are you?" Mary questioned. "'Cause I'll make you lick it right back up. Probably won't be quite as delightful the second go-round." Mary smiled. "Now buck up, Miss Pretty Little Prim and Proper. The fun is just beginning." Mary's eyes became dark slits that sank deep into her darkened sockets, and her look sent instant shivers up Claire's spine. "Y'all treated us like shit for a year and a half, talking trash about us in town and letting your damn dog destroy our chickens. And you think a little holiday dinner is going to clear consciences and make us all hunky-dory happy neighbors? Well, bullshit. It's time to play now, and it's by our rules. Ain't that right, Scott?" Her dark hair hung over her eyes as her witch-like thin face grew more hate-filled by the second. "We're going to see you take torture while you're flying high. Yeehaw!" Mary cackled. Silence once again, except for Claire's sniffles and Mary's giggles. Everyone else, except for Scott, sat in a bewildered daze. Annaline looked across the table and focused on tiny tears that were escaping the corners of Dwayne's eyes. His eyes were glossed over, shinier than she had ever seen them before. They didn't look real. Her heart pounded in deep thunderous beats like a bass drum echoing inside, shaking the walls. The crazy laughter that filled the room just minutes ago suddenly morphed into panicked fear, consuming terror and anxiety. Annaline couldn't catch her breath as her eyes bounced between Dwayne's, her sisters, and the neighbors who were holding them captive after drugging them. The room's walls felt as if they were moving closer, tightening the space around her and stealing her breath. She felt faint. She needed to throw up, but remembered what her captor had told Claire. Scott's face was zooming in and out of Dwayne's vision. He saw the knife in Scott's hand. The swirls of light and shiny chrome metallic strands danced in front of him in swirling motions like a river of blended substances from another world. The feeling in the pit of his stomach caused an ache that begged to rise and spill from his mouth. His surroundings were like nothing he had seen in all his life. His desire to protect his wife tore at every fiber of his being, yet it mattered not how hard he pulled against the resistance around his wrists. They tightened even more. The ache and burn defeated his ability to win that battle. During all the oddity and horror around him, a smoky gas bubbled up from his stomach. As it escaped in a belch of garbled retch and bile, he was reminded he had eaten a meal consisting of his best friend, Tick. The sick bastard in front of him, darting in and out of the crazy mix of blurred colors, had killed his dog and cooked him, feeding him to us in a meal of Thanksgiving. Who in hell could do that? What had he or Annaline done to deserve such an attack on their family? The chill of the blade's steel tip drug just lightly enough across his throat to send the cold, sharp tingles which begged him to take the action to flinch. His jumbled thoughts were disconnected from his ability to respond. Every emotion and feeling felt foreign, including the saliva in his mouth, which now felt like thick straw, adding to his confused judgments being charred from all the differing senses attacking at once. His vision began to fade, his receptors overtaxed. He called out, "Annaline, I love you. I'm sorry." The familiar sound of something being dragged across the back screen door awakened Dwayne from the intoxicated stupor he had fallen into. It couldn't be, though. It sounded like Tick's paws scratching to be let in, a sound both Annaline and he knew well. But he had been told Tick was dead. Worse yet, he had been told he and his family had eaten him. He must be hallucinating. Had Scott lied? Was this some kind of sick joke? The sound of claws dragging down the screen again drew attention. This time the screen door banged a couple of times as if Tick were trying to open it. "Mary, go check out that noise, baby doll. I gotta watch these 4 toys careful like," Scott snapped out. Mary sauntered by, again looking at Annaline and softly saying, Or do you have an evening of horror ahead of you, Miss Too Good? And then she laughed as she headed out toward the kitchen and to the back of the house. Annalene looked over at Scott, who still had the knife in his hand close to her husband's throat. Why? What did we ever... Shut up! Scott yelled. Several moments went by and Scott hollered out towards the back where he had sent his wife. Mary, what's going on? There was a clatter and a bang followed by a shrill scream. Mary yelled for help but was quickly muffled by the sound of growls and chewing noises, gurgling and hissing. Scott let the knife down and away from Dwayne's neck. As he began to walk past Dwayne towards the kitchen, there was a low rumble that sounded like a big dog's warning of an impending attack. Scott looked down at Dwayne as it sounded like it was coming from him. Scott leaned over Dwayne's shoulder, and as he did, Dwayne looked up and into Scott's eyes. They locked stares. Dwayne's eyes held the look of a rabid pit bull, and a low grumble was resonating inside his throat. The growl kept drawing on, never changing tone or tempo. It was the kind of rumble that would stop an intruder in their tracks, sensing the impending doom about to occur. Scott's eyes were locked with Dwayne's, but Dwayne's eyes no longer resembled what they were. They weren't blue anymore. Instead, they held a brownish-yellow hue with a sharp, deadly focus within. His eyes looked exactly like Tick's eyes. Scott stood completely still, his legs and hands now trembling as if he knew he was about to meet head-on with a beast hungry with vengeance. The low rumble became louder. The racket in the back room had subsided, leaving only heavy breaths and sighs, soon followed by the pitter-pat of paws getting louder and louder. Scott merely tightened the grip on the blade he held, but it was just enough movement to send the growling beast surging back and up, grabbing Scott by the throat. It wasn't Tick that grabbed him. It was Dwayne's jaws that snapped close and began shaking and pulling like a rabid dog in fight to the death. There were gurgles that came out with Scott's muted cries along with the sound of air hissing in escape from the open wound in his neck. He quickly dropped the knife and fell helpless to his knees, his sheer weight ripping a chunk from his neck away as the grip of Dwayne's snarling mouth held tight. It all happened so quickly that Annalene, Ben, and Claire didn't seem to have time to even conceive what was or had just happened. When Dwayne looked up and over to them from across the table, the mere sight of his bloodied face caused shrieks filled with terror and trepidation at the grotesque sight of what their eyes fell victim of seeing. Horror-struck and shaking in their skin, still unable to do more than tremble and attempt to look away, hoping it was all just a ghastly nightmare. Claire's head dropped with a loud thud to the tabletop, now passed out only inches away from the casserole dish that had begun this grisly drug-induced hell. Annalene sat sobbing uncontrollably, dazed and confused, not knowing if Dwayne was dead or a transformed animal from the depths of the unknown. She was incoherent and lost in the hallucinations still coming on strong in waves from the mushroom concoction Mary had brought. Ben's eyes were open so wide there was bright white that showed completely around his large, still dilated pupils. Tick came trotting in from the kitchen, his once white and black face now covered in crimson red with strands of black hair still clinging to his fangs. Dwayne lifted his head and looked at his faithful dog. Tick, you saved us, boy. But Dwayne's eyes scanned the table and saw the tray of meat. He told me he killed you, boy, and cooked you. Tears filled Dwayne's eyes as he hollered out to his wife, Annalene, sweet potato, baby, are you okay? I love you, girl. It was as if their energy all died in unison. Each of their heads began bobbing, their eyes becoming empty as the adrenaline quickly oozed from their veins. Hands still zip-tied together behind them, one by one their heads dropped until either their chins rested on their chests or their forehead landed on the tabletop. Silence. The sound of a body pulling itself across the floor melded with subtle moans of what sounded like a woman and broke the dead stillness that had encompassed the morbid setting around the Thanksgiving dinner table. Fans cheering at the football game could be heard on the television from the living room. Tick's low, gravelly growl began slow and steady, but was elevating alarm as Mary crawled closer to where Dwayne was motionless, his head on the dinner table, drool spilling from his mouth mixing with blood, dripping from a red line across his neck. Mary held a sharp stainless steel carving blade in one hand as she pulled herself closer to the chair holding Dwayne's body. Scott lay next to it, a crumpled pile of flannel and jeans, his head lying a pool of blood. Tick's body stiffened as he watched Mary pull herself closer. One hand gripped the chair leg, the other clutching a knife. Tick's growl increased as Mary pulled herself upright, knife held overhead, ready to plunge into Dwayne's back. Tick charged just as the front door opened. A thunderous bam shattered the quiet as Mary fell backwards onto the floor, blood oozing from the tiny round hole in the center of her forehead. Tick ran up and snapped his jaws at her, but soon sensed no threat in her deathly stillness and sat next to his master's chair he was tied to. The reflection of blue and red lights bounced off the tree limbs that could be seen through the window as it mixed with the changing television tones. Deputy Brown stepped up onto the porch and peered in through the open door at Sheriff Buckner. "What the fuck happened here, Bill?" Sheriff Bill Buckner turned and slowly responded, "God damned if I know. This is a Thanksgiving dinner from hell." Epilogue. Tonight's weather will bring in another cold front from the northwest, dropping temperatures to a subnormal 18 degrees and then warming throughout tomorrow into the upper 30s. In other breaking news, it seems Black Friday came a day early during a Thanksgiving get-together for 4 family members who are in guarded care at Barton County Hospital, recuperating from a holiday gone awry. Sheriff Bill Buckner states that 2 deceased unnamed individuals were neighbors of the recovering victims. As it turns out, the sheriff and his deputies investigating possible drug dealings happened onto a skirmish just in time to avert a possible murder. Police later found an undisclosed amount of drugs and marijuana in the deceased couple's home next door. They also uncovered an illegal psilocybin mushroom farm at the same address's basement. The 4 family members are expected to survive, but were apparently dosed by ingesting a casserole containing a large amount of the mushrooms before being tied up and tortured. One of the 2 suspects was shot and killed by Sheriff Buckner as he came through the door, stumbling onto an attempted murder in progress. The suspect, nor her husband, survived. More details as they are uncovered. We here at Channel 11 hope you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving Day, and remember to show kindness during your Black Friday shopping. Only 28 more shopping days until Christmas.
Hello? Hello? Somebody? Anybody? Can anybody hear me? Please, please, get me out of here. Casey stirred. He couldn't see anything, but he could hear loud and clear. Dove? Is that you? Of course it was. Her voice was unmistakable. Case? Casey, where are you? I'm right here, Dove. Follow my voice. Casey was shaking in his sleep. Lucidity was creeping in, but the nightmare's grip was strong. I can't. I'm stuck. Casey, you have to get me out of here. Say you'll come get me out of here. Casey's heart was hammering inside his head, but he couldn't hear it over the scratches. Out of where, Dove? Where are you stuck? He knew that it was just a dream. Dove was dead. Not only that, but it had been an open casket funeral, and Dove's coffin was padded everywhere. The scratches weren't making any sense, so they couldn't be anything other than a figment of his imagination, as was the scared voice of his dead friend. The Backrooms, Casey. I'm stuck in the Backrooms. Casey woke up drenched in sweat. Again. It had to have been the sound of heavy rain hitting the lacquered wood, not the general sobbing, nor the priest straining his voice over the wrath of Mother Nature. It couldn't have been car noises or the like, that's for sure. The cemetery was nowhere near traffic-ridden streets. No, it was the rain falling on the coffin lid. That had to be the sound that Casey made feel so uneasy. Dove's grace was admired by classmates and teachers alike. Casey pressed his lips together and shook his head absent-mindedly. Grace of all things, was brought up at Dove's funeral. What had Dove been like? Smart? Yes. Strong? Very. Beautiful, without a shadow of a doubt. But graceful? Her back was always drooping like she was the human version of a question mark, and she never saw a problem in playing soccer wearing a skirt. If Dove's spirit was present, the likelihood of her face-palming herself was staggering. Casey chuckled to himself at that mental image. His father smacked him over the head. "Pull yourself together," he hissed from between clenched teeth. Casey was very well put together. He was so well put together that he was the only one to recognize the eulogy for the garbage it was. Whoever wrote it relied too much on their Google search. Casey eyed Dove's mother. The woman was devastated, surely. But this wasn't a funeral for her daughter, but a funeral for the daughter she wished she had. The rain was unrelenting. Casey pictured Dove standing beside the big oak tree, 10 feet from where he was, dressed in her maroon overalls, mocking every word coming out of the priest's mouth. Dove had been the funniest person Casey ever knew, mostly on Monday mornings, when she would reenact the Sunday service she had attended the day prior. Dove was not like those other kids who were forced to go to church because their parents said so. No. The Sunday service was her favorite time of the week. Not only would she listen carefully to everything the priest said, so she could debunk it later, but she also paid close attention to the other people attending. Dove loved calling out hypocrisy, and nothing quenched her thirst as churchgoers did, although selectively she thrived on gossip. Theater critic, every hour Dove spent studying, every time she opened a Word document to write something that wasn't school-related, every time their D&D squad would talk about dreams and aspirations, Dove would mention she'll be a theater critic someday. Grace? Theater critics are not graceful. Grace is surrounded by pastel colors, and Dove was as rich in pigment as Indian ink. Why didn't the priest mention that instead? That her biggest passion was writing, and that she had more drive than quicksilver in a sauna. Why didn't anybody point out that only 4 of Dove's 7 cousins showed up? Why did Dove, of all people, have to die? Why was the world so unfair? Why was it raining? There were too many people crying just for show, and Casey didn't want to contribute to the masquerade. Either way, the tears wouldn't come. Casey felt too uneasy to cry. There was something about the noise around him. It wasn't the sobbing, nor the priest straining his voice over the wrath of Mother Nature. Casey kept telling himself that it was the hard raindrops against the lid of the coffin. That had to have been it. That had to be what sounded like scratching. 3 weeks had passed since Dove's funeral, and the nightmares just got worse and worse. Casey still couldn't see anything, but Dove's voice reverberated within the confines of his mind, louder than it would have if she were right next to him. "Hello?" Dream Casey was set on not responding this time around. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Casey felt his temperature rise, but he managed to keep his dream version of himself quiet. He was not going to interact with his dead friend. Not tonight. Casey was sick and tired of feeling like he hadn't slept in years. He was sick and tired of dreading nightfall, knowing full well that the torment will start anew once he lowered his head on the cool pillow. "Can anybody hear me? Please, get me out of here." "Case!" Dove was crying. Casey, please. Please talk to me. I'm so scared, Casey. I'm begging you. Something was tickling Casey at the temples. Sweat or tears, he couldn't tell. That sensation should have been enough to wake anybody up, but, as always, Dove's calling from the other realm had no mercy. I need you, Casey. Please. Please get me out of here. He knew he shouldn't give in to his mind playing tricks on him. The real Dove was 6 feet under, feeding maggots and fertilizing the soil around her. Even so, Casey's will was hanging on by a thread as fragile as spider webs. I thought you loved me. The thread broke. Don't you love me, Casey? Of course I do. Then get me out of here. Say you'll get me out of the Backrooms. Casey woke up drenched in sweat again. Not only that, but he also was crying and shaking from the top of his head to the tips of his fingers. The school cafeteria was pretty empty. Casey's friends were all sitting at their usual spot alongside the elephant in the room, which was Dove's unoccupied seat. Karina, one of the 2 girls at the table, took her yogurt cup and almost slammed it on Casey's tray as soon as he sat down. What the hell are you doing? Casey wanted to know. Karina's face was stern and her voice even more so. You need to eat. Even though the girl was 1 year his junior, she acted like everybody's mother. I am eating. Casey pointed to the almost portion of mashed potatoes in front of him. Angie and Callum exchanged a glance, and both of them placed their muffins on Casey's tray. Angie also gave him her soda for good measure. You guys are being ridiculous. I don't want your food. Well, that's too bad, because you're having it whether you like it or not. Casey was about to return the items to their respective givers, but Brian stopped him with a soft shove of his hand. Please, man. We all miss her, but you can't go on like this. Casey took a second to look at his friends. Everybody looked bad. The bags under his own eyes were the worst, but his friends weren't looking like they were about to walk into a photo shoot either. Brian was so pale, the contrast to his freckles made him look like somebody sprayed motor oil on his face. Karina stopped wearing jewelry altogether, and for someone with 5 facial piercings, that's saying a lot. Callum and Angie used to be all over each other during lunch. Now, even spotting them holding hands had become rare. Casey hovered over his tray. He said nothing, but him opening Karina's yogurt cup was all the reassurance his friends needed. The thanks went unspoken, just like the many sentiments that strengthened their bond in the past weeks. The lunch break was halfway over until... Stop! Angie didn't mean to say it out loud. She was taken aback when 4 pairs of eyes met hers inquiringly. Callum squeezed her knee. Everything all right? Angie looked at her boyfriend with reindeer eyes. Her lips started to quiver, and she shook her head slowly. I just wanted to stop. Callum brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear, and Angie took that as an invitation to lean into him. They will, baby. Just give it time. The moment they shared looked way too intimate to be interpreted by outsiders, yet Karina couldn't help herself. They? Callum threw a poisonous glance. Don't, Kay. Not now. But Angie didn't share his apprehension. She detached herself from Callum's side and brushed both hands over her face in an attempt at pulling herself together. Ever since Dove died, I've been having these dreams. Casey felt his throat constrict. They're weird. Like, Dove is technically never in them, and I don't hear her or anything, but it's like I know she's there, and I know she's scared. Angie's voice broke on the last 2 words. You don't have to do this, baby. Callum stroked her back, but that only seemed to make her more upset. but I want to just... Everybody was holding their breaths. It's these rooms. Casey felt his heart beating inside his skull. And they're repetitive, like room next to room next to room, like underground parking lots that are divided into sections, but narrow and never-ending. And there are no doors or windows, just rooms beyond rooms, like it's this hallway with huge mirrors at both ends, so it just looks like it goes on and on and on. Room next to room next to room. And it's so odd. Everything is like this old, ugly yellow. And it's bright, but not that nice brightness. It's that abandoned hospital light. The one where you don't know if it's safer with the lights on or off. Angie was out of breath. I'm not crazy. Nobody said that, baby. I'm not crazy. Half of the cafeteria turned to look their way. Nobody thinks you're crazy, Angie. Karina stretched her hand over the table to caress her friends. And if they do, she turned her head toward the onlookers. Let me at them. Casey hid his shaking hands under the table. Everybody did their best to comfort Angie until lunch break was almost over. Callum, Angie, and Karina stood up, trays in hand, ready to leave for their next class. A couple said goodbye, but Casey didn't hear anything. You guys okay? Karina was looking at Brian and Casey. Brian smiled and reassured her that he'll join her once Casey's finished eating. Karina shrugged, squeezed Casey's shoulder, and left the boys alone. Casey and Brian were never particularly close, but they shared an understanding for each other that was hard to explain. Both were men of few words, and both appreciated the same things in life and other people. You okay, man? You don't look so good. Brian eyed Casey carefully. His stare was focused, and his face had a little more color to it than it did an hour prior. Yeah. I'm good. Casey tried easing a smile into his statement, but Brian's stare was so intense, Casey could feel it prickle on his skin. That's when he noticed it, too. Brian was shaking. So, Angie's dreams. Weird, huh? Yeah, poor thing. The bell was supposed to ring any second now. The last of the students in the cafeteria had already gotten up to return the trays. Neither Brian nor Casey broke their stare down. Brian disrupted the silence, however. What about you? What about me? Any weird dreams lately? Casey felt the pits of his shirt grow cold and wet. No. What makes you ask that? His tone was way harsher than it had tended to be. Brian flinched a little, and just like that, his eyes grew wide and he broke the contact. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought you looked like... Oh, never mind. You thought I looked like what? Casey moved closer to his friend. Brian seemed to reassess the situation and looked like he couldn't get away from it fast enough. Sorry, dude, my bad. I misinterpreted something. Just forget it, okay? Brian rose to leave, and Casey shot up and grabbed his arm with force to bruise. Tell me, goddammit! The lunch lady called out to them, reminding them of something or other that they should or shouldn't be doing. Tell me, please. Casey's voice was so quiet he barely heard it himself. Staring into Brian's face, he realized that which he initially interpreted as confrontation was in fact despair. Brian was on the verge of a mental breakdown, more so than Angie, and probably even more than Casey himself. I have them too, man. Casey didn't need to ask. He knew what Brian meant. The dreams, the yellow rooms. I also felt Dove there. The lunch lady yelled again. At first, you think the wallpaper is just an ugly, outdated print. Casey felt nauseous. But that's no print. Brian's face was so close, his freckles were out of focus. Their cries for help, scratched into the walls by the people who were stuck there. "Boys!" Brian and Casey jumped as if a shotgun had been fired next to their ears. They scurried out of the cafeteria with mumbled apologies. Casey and Brian were in different classes, so Casey ran to his as fast as he could, ignoring his friend calling after him. Casey soldiered on through the rest of the school day, pretending to be attentive during class and purposefully avoiding his friends. Once he got home, nothing he did, be it homework or gaming, made daylight diminish fast enough. And that's because, for the first time since his friend passed away, Casey looked forward to going to bed. Hello? Hello? Is someone there? Casey focused on steadying his breathing. Yes. Case? Casey, is that you? Yes, Dove, it's me. Casey, oh, thank God you're back. You have to get me out of here. Where are you? I'm in the back rooms. Casey fought to keep his thoughts aligned. Look around. What do you see? Yellow. Everything is yellow. That confirmed it. Neither Casey, nor Angie, or Brian were going mad. Dove was indeed stuck somewhere, and it was not beneath the earth in a narrow rectangular box. Everything is so yellow. Dove, tell me more. What else can you see? Rooms everywhere. They never end. It's like I'm running in replay. These rooms, where are they? I don't know. Stay with me, all right? I need you to concentrate. Where were you before? Before the back rooms? I don't remember. How did you get there? I don't remember. Can you remember something? Anything? A face, an object, something? I don't remember. I don't know. Is there somebody else with you? Dove? Not somebody. What do you mean? It's something. Something is in here with me. I can't see it, but it's here. It's playing with me, watching, following. Casey felt his consciousness slipping in. Casey, you have to get me out of here. Say you'll get me out of here. But I don't know where you are. I'm in the back rooms. Dove, that's not helping. Come on, focus. You keep calling them the back rooms, not just the rooms. You know something. Now help me out here. Where are you? Where are these back rooms? There was silence. Lucidity was coming down hard, and Casey never thought he'd dread waking up from one of these nightmares. Dove, where are the back rooms? And Dove answered, everywhere. The back rooms are everywhere. Casey was not drenched in sweat when he woke up. His sheets, on the other hand, were ripped to shreds. 2 more months had passed since Dove died, and for the first time since her funeral, it was raining. Casey remembered the sounds made by the raindrops hitting the lowered coffin and mistaking them for scratches. He still had the nightmares every once in a while, but since the night he tried communicating with her more, the intensity of Dove subsided. Also, he began having normal dreams again. Dove's pleas would morph into grunts and mumbles, and the nightmare would melt into a halfway muted soundtrack for another dream, one that provided both sound and imagery. It was like Casey's subconsciousness was slowly yet surely winning the fight against these nightmares, allowing him to sleep soundly again. Casey's friends were doing better too, and she began to smile again, and she and Callum resumed showcasing their teenage affection during breaks or outside of school. Brian also seemed to be doing better. Casey and he never brought up the dreams again, and judging by his much healthier appearance, Brian probably stopped having them altogether. Karina was Karina, heart of gold, shell of rock. Nobody could accuse her of not grieving the loss of her friend, but she was the first to recover after Dov's passing and gave nobody a reason to worry about her emotional well-being. All in all, the 5 of them were doing fine, and even though moving on was still ways ahead, they were on the right track. There had to be a logical explanation for the semblance of their dreams. More than likely, Angie, Brian, and Casey had seen the same movie or read the same piece of fiction a long time ago, thus triggering similar brain activity in their heads when Dove died. Karina might have had dreams about Dove too, Callum as well. Karina's parents probably did too, but that didn't mean that they must have spotted some inexplicable crack between life and death. That would have sounded a million types of stupid. Casey was too old and too smart to believe in paranormal nonsense. Dove was dead, but he wasn't. He would miss her greatly, but this was the first day of the rest of his life, and he planned on living it to the fullest, just like his best friend would have wanted him to. It was Friday afternoon. Casey and his friends were going to meet up at Karina's for a game of D&D. They hadn't played in ages and thought that it would be cool to pick it up again. Casey had gotten home from school, showered, ate, and just as he finished brushing his teeth, his phone vibrated with an incoming message. The message was from their group chat, probably Callum asking which flavored Cheetos to bring, or a photo from Karina showing off the setup she installed. Casey opened the message and dropped his phone with a scream. The screen cracked, but nothing else was affected by the hard fall. The phone vibrated again, and again, and again. It sounded like a chainsaw against the bathroom tiles. Casey himself had fallen and crawled on the bathroom floor until his back hit a wall. He began to sob. The phone kept vibrating from a plethora of incoming messages, all from a number that was supposed to be inactive and stay inactive forever. Dove was messaging the group chat in all caps. The first message had been a haunting picture full of yellow. Casey's fragile inner peace, the one he fought so hard to regain after the nightmares subsided, crumbled. He got himself off the floor, grabbed his still vibrating phone, and dashed out of the house, fully forgetting to lock the door or grab his bike. Casey ran through the rain to Karina's house like his life depended on it. The muscles in his legs were screaming, and his lungs were burning, but nothing mattered except the phone that was still vibrating furiously in his pant pocket. Once he reached his destination, Casey dashed through the front door, completely forgetting to greet Karina's parents, and flew up the stairs to where his friend's room was. Everybody was already there, seated in a circle on the floor. "Did you guys see them?" Everybody froze. Casey was soaked to the skin and looked like he was about to hurt somebody. "We have to help her. I'm serious. She's stuck there. We have to find her and get her out of there. Kay, I need your laptop." Karina frowned. Brian, unsure what to do, pointed to the laptop on Karina's writing desk. Casey wasted no time in closing the Spotify playlist and typing Shaman in the Google search bar. Does any of you guys know what she means by backrooms? I asked where they are, and she said everywhere. So I'm thinking it's a state of mind or something. But how can it be if she's not alone in there and the walls are scratched? Like, what are we missing here? Casey turned to face his friends. All 4 of them looked dumbfounded. "You all right, dude?" Brian got off the floor and took a tentative step in Casey's direction. "You need a towel or—" "No, I'm not all right. Check your phones, people." The 4 of them rummaged through their pockets in search of their phones. They all looked at their screens, then at each other. What are we looking for exactly?" Callum sounded genuinely confused. "Somebody commented on my latest Instagram post, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you mean." Angie turned her phone to provide evidence for her statement. Casey was on the verge of losing his mind. Guys, are you fucking kidding me? It's Dove. Dove sent us 1,000,000 messages in our group chat just now. Angie shivered, and Callum threw a protective arm around her frame in an instant. Brian and Karina were livid. Casey, Brian spoke with the tiniest of voices. Not cool, dude. Yeah, Karina sounded angry. Whatever you're trying to do, you need to stop right now. People, do you hear yourselves? Casey snatched his phone out of his pant pocket and tried unlocking it. Nothing. All the screen had to offer was a spider web on black glass. Oh, shit! Casey scanned Karina's room and rushed to the plug that had her phone charger in it. It's not working. What the fuck? This piece of shit worked fine just seconds ago. Casey almost tackled Brian. Unlock your phone and give it to me. Casey, you really need to calm down now. Nevertheless, Brian did as he was told and handed Casey his unlocked phone. Casey pressed the icon for the group chat and stared for what felt like an eternity to the last message posted around the time he was brushing his teeth. Callum had sent a photo of the Cheetos aisle with the caption, "Which one?" Bastard. You deleted them. What? Deleted what? Did you just call me? Angie, I need your phone. Angie was a step ahead of him, however, as were Callum and Karina. All three of them shoved their phones into Casey's face, showing a message identical to the one on Brian's phone from their group chat. There was a knock at the door. Karina, is everything all right? Everything's fine, Dad. Just give us a minute. Casey's heart was shattered. Why? Why would you guys do this? She posted a picture of her surroundings, and she finally found a way to contact us. She needs us. We need to get her out of these rooms. Casey turned to Angie. They're yellow, Ange. Just like you said. Yellow and never-ending. Okay, enough. Back off. Callum rose to his feet. Angie finally got rid of her insomnia from this bullshit. You are not bringing that up again. Karina, I'm coming in. Karina's 6'4" tall father stepped into the room, looking every bit as angry as his daughter. Karina's mother was right behind him. What's going on here? The mother inquired. Casey was just saying goodbye to everybody. Karina's voice stung like frostbite. Weren't you, Casey? Casey felt his eyes water. He bit his lip, and in a last attempt at tugging at his friend's heartstrings, he turned towards Brian. Tell them. Brian was so white he almost glowed. Brian, tell them. Tell them what you told me. The rooms, the yellow walls, the scratches. Tell them. Brian shook his head twice and shrugged. Sorry, dude. I have no idea what you're talking about. Something within Casey collapsed. Without another word, he went to get his phone and walked out of Karina's house with apologies he didn't mean. Casey's retina stung. Blinking was difficult. The world was asleep while he surfed the blue fluorescent lights of digital worldwide knowledge, searching for something that might make him get to his friend. What color does yellow symbolize? On one hand, yellow stands for freshness, happiness, positivity, honor, and joy. But on the other hand, it represents cowardice and deceit. Not helpful. What is the spiritual meaning of yellow? Personal power and fulfillment, abundance, courage, and self-confidence. Yellow represents happiness, clarity, and sunlight. If that were so, Dove, wherever she was, would have been fine. Casey considered stealing his mom's credit card, because he knew that the money he saved up wouldn't cover the things he needed to buy. An EMF reader, a thermal camera, maybe an Ouija board. Google was not all helpful, though. Casey found interesting articles and clips with and regarding people who survived clinical death, but finding these people on social media was a different process altogether. The ones he did manage to find had ridiculous privacy settings. Casey couldn't speak to anybody who might have seen the other side, so he was just as blind as in the nightmares with Dove. Casey yawned. He tried starting his phone one last time, but it remained unresponsive. He wished he could have had a better look at the pictures of the Backrooms. Maybe he could have spotted something Dove missed. Maybe he could extract it out of his phone somehow, upload it somewhere, and do a reverse image search of it. And if that didn't work, well, he wasn't the world's best artist, but he could throw together 5 lines in an attempt at recreating it and ask Reddit for clues. He would try anything, no matter how ridiculous. Casey yawned again and knew that it was time to go to sleep. He shut off his computer, got into bed, and closed his eyes. Hello? Casey opened his eyes and sat upright. He was alone in his room and still very much awake. Dove? He looked around but saw nothing. Dove, are you in here? Casey got out of bed and looked under his desk, under the bed, and in his wardrobe. He even opened the window to see if there was somebody outside. Nothing. Casey got into bed again and closed his eyes anew. Dove, can you hear me? Yes. Casey, oh thank God. I thought you left. No, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Casey was not asleep. He knew that for a fact. He still couldn't see his friend, but he could hear her as if she were right next to him. That was good. It meant less trouble for him to get a hold of her. It was so hard to reach you lately. Where were you? I'm sorry, Dove, but I'm here now and I won't leave you again. Help me, Casey. Help me. I will, I promise. I think I came across something that might help. Look around, Dove. Can you see? Will you get me out of here? I don't know, but I'll try. Look for a case. Casey. My Casey. What? What is it? You love me, Casey. Casey swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes. Will you get me out of here? I'm trying, Dove, but you really need to. Shh. No more trying. You tried enough. I now need you to do. So, will you? Will you get me out of the Backrooms? Casey remembered Angie's pathetic eyes, glossy from the tears that were about to happen. He remembered Callum acting up in front of the girlfriend who was out of his league, making her feel like she needs him. Casey remembered Karina's self-importance and shitty attitude. Last but not least, Casey remembered Brian. Dumb, quiet, treacherous Brian. In the midst of all this was Dove. Smart, strong, beautifully ungraceful Dove. Brian's voice echoed in Casey's head. Sorry, dude, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Yes. 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 Say it, please. I need to hear it. Yes, I will. No, Casey. I need to hear you say, yes, Dove. I will get you out of the Backrooms. Yes, Dove. I will get you out of the Backrooms. The scratching stopped. Dove began to cry. Thank you. I got you, Dove. Don't worry. We'll do this together. Now look around. Can you see a light switch anywhere? Silence. Dove, focus. A light switch. Can you see it? Silence. Dove? Case opened his eyes, and the first thing he registered was light. Casey squinted, wondering if one of his parents heard him talking to himself and came to check on him. But then his eyes adjusted, and the first thing he saw was yellow. No. Oh, no. Rooms beyond rooms beyond rooms, in what had to be the most haunting color in existence. Casey got up on wobbly feet and felt dread expanding to every cell in his body. Dove. But Dove was no longer there, which is not to say that Casey was alone.
Chilling tales for dark nights.